Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle, your host for today's webinar. Thank you for joining us for Placement in Read Naturally Live. Your presenter today is Claire Hayes. Claire has been involved with Read Naturally since its beginning development. She consults with educators nationwide to discuss reading, fluency, and the Read Naturally strategy. Claire loves working with teachers to help them maximize the benefits of the various Read Naturally interventions. There will be time for question and answer during and after the presentation. Please ask your questions in the question and answer feature in your meeting panel. If we do not get to your question today, we will email you with the response. You should have received the link to the handout for today's meeting in your reminder email. I also added a link to the handout to the chat box. Many of you have asked about a recording of this webinar. A link to the recording will be emailed to you tomorrow. Feel free to share the recording. Again, this webinar is Placement in Read Naturally Live. We'll be offering other webinars throughout the school year. Our next webinar is Back to School with Read Live tomorrow, August 18th at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time. Please register for the upcoming webinars on the Read Naturally website. Everyone who registers for a webinar will be able to attend and will receive a link to the recording. Finally, if you do have technical difficulties, please contact Zoom webinar support. Their phone number and online chat information will be in your chat box. And now I'm going to pass the microphone off to Claire, your presenter for today's Read Naturally webinar.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you everyone who is attending this session. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate all that you do for your students. Today, what we're going to talk about, of course, is placing students in Read Naturally Live. So let's go ahead and begin. When we think about teacher responsibilities, we think about that a lot in the fall of the year. Of course, the first thing that comes up with working with Read Live and really with working with any program is planning and setting up. So those sorts of things happen within Read Live, and we have many webinars and videos that can assist you with those planning and setting up pieces. Please check out our website to take a look at those. Placing students is the next thing that has to happen, and it has to happen prior to students getting started. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Then you have to teach students how to do the steps properly. We have training videos for that for students, and I will send you links to that when we get to that point. And then the final responsibility is monitoring student performance. And that is something that you do throughout the year. In fact, actually, I think you spend the majority of the year doing that final piece. And we will have webinars in September and October that will deal with monitoring student performance. But today, what we're going to focus on is placing our students in Read Naturally Live. When you begin placement, it's important to understand that the things you are going to do is determine which Read Naturally Live level is appropriate for your student. You're going to decide which series is appropriate and what the goal is. Now, I'm going to walk you through the process in a PowerPoint. I'm going to demonstrate it within the actual program. And I'm also going to send you links to little videos about it. My guess is you don't have your students sitting outside your room waiting to be placed the minute the session is done. So if you want a quick refresher right before the task of actually placing your students, those videos that I send will be very helpful for that. In order to understand placement, it's important to understand that there's two phases. The first is conducting initial placement. That's what we need to do in order to get started. And then we have checking initial placement. And that's what we do after we have a little data on our students, ideally 3 stories. Okay, we do have a webinar coming up about that, but today what we're focusing on is conducting initial placement. That is what is essential in order to get started. So the first thing a teacher needs to do is to determine a student's needs. We have some students who need to work primarily on fluency and comprehension. Other students really just have phonics needs. And then there's a good chunk of our students who have both, right? Read Live is a program that has multiple programs within it. So we have a phonics program, Word Warm-Ups Live. The fluency and comprehension, of course, is in Read Naturally Live. It's in 1 Minute Reader Live. And we also have a phonics series within Read Naturally Live. So sometimes students are going to be using one program, sometimes they may be using two. So we'll talk about those different situations today. But I'm going to start with the most straightforward, and that is the fluency situation. If you are using Read Live and your primary focus is to use our flagship program within Read Live, which is what Read Naturally Live is, that's what we're talking about today, you need to determine which level is right for them in that program. In order to do so, the first thing you're going to do is estimate what level you think the student's reading at. It's an estimate. It's going to be wrong, right? You're just going to try to get it as close as you can. In order to do that, you'll use any data that you have. Standardized assessments, reading inventory, maybe there's some information you know that you got from a previous teacher, your oral reading assessments. Any of these pieces of information will help you make that determination. Know that if you guess wrong, you will still end up in the right place, okay? So just make your best guess. Don't spend a lot of time on that piece. In order to determine Anna's level, for example, we'll have a little sample student here. This picture of Anna is showing us a 7th grade student. She is well below expectations on state standardized tests. Her current English 6th grade English teacher says that her current teacher in 7th grade says that she has difficulties with 6th grade novels. So she's reading 6th grade novels, but they're very challenging for her. And of course, she's below expectations. That's why we have her in a reading intervention. And so with this student, you would want to start testing at 5.0. Now, what if you thought in your head, I'd probably start testing her at 6.0. I might start testing her at 4.5. All of those are okay. The closer you are in your estimate, the shorter your placement process will be. That being said, placement in Read Naturally Live really only takes about 5 minutes per student. Okay, so if you end up being a little off, it just means you have to do one more 1-minute timing. Okay, so we're going to go through that process so you can see it for yourself. And we're going to begin with demoing it within the program. We'll show a little bit about how to enroll a student and license a student. So because you can't place them until those things are done. Then I will go through a placement test and we'll have some samples for you. So let me pop out of the PowerPoint for just a moment, and I'm going to log in as a staff member into my Read Naturally, into my Read Live account. When I log in, I'm going to go to the home page where I can see all of my tiles that are available to me. If you have not added your students, you can do that by going under Student Setup. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but underneath Student Setup, there is that Add Student button, and you will fill in this information. I want you to notice that when you add your student's name, you select their grade, you select their school, you give them a user ID and a password. The next thing you have to do if you want them to work in the program is license the student. Okay, so you're going to select yes. Notice, as soon as I select yes to this question, license the student, these boxes are checked. This student now has access to Read Naturally Live and 1 Minute Reader Live. 1 Minute Reader Live is our totally independent reading program. We now allow students to have access it by default when they're given a license. And this is very helpful to teachers because when you do placement in Read Naturally Live, you need to be one-on-one with your students. And many of us do not have a time where we get to be one-on-one with our students. So if you're faced with your intervention group of maybe 6, 7 students, and they're all in there, and you need to pull them one at a time to do placement, that 1 Minute Reader Live is a great independent reading program where they can work in a structured, guided reading program that provides them with the support they need and materials at their instructional level, assuming they read at a 1st through mid 5th grade reading level. Okay, so that 1 Minute Reader Live is great for those students. If you don't want to have them, let them have access to it, you can just deselect it. Okay, but by default, it comes on. So when you click Save and Add another, or save and close, now your student is going to be listed within your account. Okay. Now, if you have a returning student, a student who you inherited from before, that student may not have access to 1 Minute Reader automatically. So you do want to check that. So in order to check that before you have all your students in your room when you try to do placement, you'll click on the 1 Minute Reader Live tile. Notice that there are a number of headers at the top of this page. If you go over to the right, you'll see one column title that is OMR Access. If I click on that column one time, it will sort and it will list all the students who do not have access to 1 Minute Reader Live at the top. So if I want to give them access, I can click the top student and click the bottom student while I'm holding the shift key down, and it will highlight all of them. If I only want to click one or two, I can do that individually and select the Add OMR Access button. Okay, so that way your students will have access to that independent program so you can do placement and Read Naturally Live. So now let's get to the part we're actually here to talk about. I'm going to go under the Read Naturally Live tile. Notice the first bullet on the list is place my licensed students. Okay, so when you come in here, you will see a list of all of the students you have. If you notice, there's a toolbar at the bottom. Now, every screen auto fits differently. So on my screen, you can see over on the right, there's a button here that says place. Some of your screens may fit in a manner that makes it so you don't see that unless you use the toolbar at the bottom to scroll over. Notice that the series, level, and goal columns for my students, most of them are filled in because most of my students have been placed. If you have a student who is working in the program in the spring and they are coming back to you, you do not need to redo Read Naturally Live placement. Okay, they can just pick up where they left off in May or June or whenever they ended. All right, it may be a little hard for some kids because many of our students don't do a lot of reading in the summer. So if that's the case, you certainly can lower it. But what I found is that most often students are fine. They pick up where they left off, and after a story or two, they're cruising along really well. Okay, so you don't need to replace students who used Read Naturally Live the previous year. When you select the place button next to the student's name, it will bring you to our Read Naturally Live placement. And it tells you that step one is to select a level to test. Remember when we were in the PowerPoint and we had to estimate what level we think the student was reading at? We estimated that. This is where you select those levels, okay? So let's say I have a third grader who I think is reading about a year below grade level. I may select level 2, right? Now we have another column in this table that's titled Series Available at This Level. And this is important because we do have different options depending on the level that the student's working in. At this 2.0 example, we have the sequence series level 2.0. We also have the phonics series, which is blends and digraphs. All right. So that is another option. If blends and digraphs in 1.8 of the phonics series is written at about the same reading level as the sequence series 2.0. Okay. So when I select that, the level that I think the student's reading at, and I click next, I'm presented with a passage for the student to read to me. The student needs to be sitting next to me, looking at the same screen. And I'll say, just like you know how to say, when I hear you begin reading, I'll start my timer. You know, maybe have them take a deep breath before they get going. And then once they begin reading, you click that start timer button. Now, this is just your standard benchmark fluency assessment. You're timing them reading this passage for a minute. You're keeping track of any mistake that the student makes, because at the end of that minute, you're going to enter the number of missed words into this rectangle that's over at to the right of the passage. Now, our placement will put students in a level that's a little bit above their instructional level, right? And this is because students get a lot of support when they're working in Read Naturally Live. They get audio support to practice reading the story with, so they learn words they don't know, they solidify those difficult high frequency words. They also read the same passage over and over again. So because of that support, they're able to function well in a level that's a little bit higher than what they would normally be working in. So it's one of the reasons why you do need to do placement within Read Naturally Live to select the right level.
Click on the last word you read when the bell sounded.
Audio support asked us to click the last word the student read when the bell sounded. I select the word and then I enter the number of errors that the student had during that reading, and I click the next button. I'm now told that on level 2.0, the student read 50 words correctly per minute. The range for that level is 30 to 60. So in order for this to be the right level for the student, they need to read between 30 and 60 words correct per minute. Okay, 50 is right within that range. So the computer is saying, stop testing and pick one of these options. Your student can work in 2.0 of the sequence series or work on blends and digraphs in the phonics series. All right. If you want to continue testing because you disagree with this assessment, or you just want to see if another level might also be a good fit, you simply click continue testing, and then you can go and select another level to test on. All right. I tend to go with the recommendation that the computer gives me. So when we select level 2.0 for the sequence series and click next, I am provided with this little pop-up window. I always get nervous I've made a mistake when I see one of these message boxes, but it is not saying that. It is simply confirming that you are putting Jenny Jones into the sequence series level 2.0, so it's early second grade, and the goal is 80. Let's talk about this goal for just a moment. It's the Read Naturally Live story goal. It's their pass timing, words correct per minute story goal. This is the other reason why placement is essential to do within our program. This number, this 80, is based on the words correct per minute score that the student had on the placement passage. So if you don't know the words correct per minute score on a level in Read Naturally Live that they're going to work in, picking a story goal is almost impossible. Okay, so you will save yourself time in the long run to take your students through this. So now when I click OK, I will see that Jenny Jones is in level 2.0 with a goal of 80. If this needs to be adjusted for some reason, I can click the edit button that is even further to the right and make an adjustment to my series. I can make an adjustment to the level, and I can make an adjustment to the goal through the plus and minus signs. Right? So that is walking through your standard placement test and Read Naturally Live. So we're going to pop back into our PowerPoint for a moment. And I want to talk to you about a situation that you will most likely have with at least one student. And that is when a student places between two levels. Okay. So now we have a student who was given level 3.0 and read 65 words correct per minute. So the computer said the student's results do not fit in the placement range. So we cannot recommend a level, but we can recommend a level to test again. So because the student tested outside the range on the high end, the computer is recommending that you now test him on level 3.5. So when you do that, your student reads 55 words correct per minute, which is outside the range on the low end, right? So one level is a little too easy. The next level is a little, or one level is a little too, easy, and the next one's a little too hard. So the computer is giving you what I think to be is kind of a, a recommendation that doesn't tell you that much. It's just saying that he's between two levels. You're going to have to use your best judgment to decide which one to put him in. Okay. So if you know some things about this student, some things to consider. If it's an ELL student where you know English vocabulary will also be a challenge, then I would recommend going with the lower level, right? Because you don't want that vocabulary to be too big of an issue. So put them in the lower level if that's the case. If it is a student who has a good oral vocabulary, maybe likes a challenge, put them in 3.5, put them in that higher level. If it's a student with very low self-esteem, who really doesn't want to read and really needs to see some success right away, put them in the lower level, right? But if you do that, if you choose to put him in the lower level, be sure to move him up quickly. A student who is outside the range on the high end is likely to not need to read many stories in that level. So it's kind of a fun thing to do for a student, right? You put them in a level, they read a few passages, and then you get to say, you're already making progress. I'm going to bump you up to that level 3.5, right? So use that to your advantage if you're going to go with that option. All right. So let's say we chose level 3.0 for Rob because Rob was a student who maybe he needed a little ego boost. So we put him in level 3.0. We would then select that level from the list. The list will provide us with options from 3.0 and 3.5. Okay, so we'll have a few different options. Let's say we select 3.0 and it assigns the goal just like it did when I walked through the demonstration for you. It assigned a goal of words correct per minute. So how did it set that goal? What did the computer use to make that decision? It depends on the grade of the student, and it depends on the words correct per minute score on the placement passage that you decided was the right level for them, right? So if you have a student who's young in the early elementary, 4th grade and below, the computer will add 30 to the placement words correct per minute score, and then it will round down to the nearest 5. Older students, they tend to be able to make larger gains through the steps of the program. So the program or the computer will automatically add 40 to that words correct per minute score and round to the nearest 5. Okay. So remember Anna over here, she was a 7th grader. So think, what would the computer add for Anna? Well, she's above 5th grade, so it's going to add 40 to that level that we placed her in. So it's going to 82 plus 40, then it's going to round down to 120 for that goal for Anna. And Rob, because we decided to put him in that easier level, the score on that level was 65. So we'll use that number, add 30 because he was in 4th grade or below, and we get the 95. And you can see that here in the level selection window. It does list the goal in there. You can overwrite it if there's a reason. The most common reason for overwriting a goal might be, I don't know most common, but one that does come up, a student who maybe has a speech issue and being timed reading and having to meet a certain goal exacerbates that issue, maybe a stutter or something like that. Sometimes then we would recommend, making that goal a lot lower to fit the needs of that particular student. But unless there's something that's kind of obvious that would need to make a change, go with what the computer recommends. And then based off of how they do on the first few stories, you can adjust accordingly. Because of course that will be the best information is how they do on those first initial stories. Now we do have a beginning reader exception. So let's say you have an early reader. You give her that level 1.0 passage on the placement test, and you need her to read between 30 and 60, but she only reads 23 words. So can she work in the program? She's outside the range on the low end. She can still work and read naturally live if she knows her beginning sounds, and she can recognize about 50 written words. Okay. So you would have 2 options for that student. You could put her in 1.0 of the sequence series, but I will almost never do that. I almost always choose the Phonics series 0.8, it's short vowel CVC words. 0.8 is easier than 1.0. So if you have a kid that's not quite there, or is very, is really at the bottom of that range, having just a little bit easier passages is going to help. For one, they're tiny, a little bit shorter. There's audio supported lessons about a phonics pattern, about a CVC sound or a short vowel sound, right before they read a passage that has a number of those words, those short vowel words in that passage. So it is a little bit easier. So I tend to do, if you have a young student like that. If you have a young student who cannot even recognize 50 words, maybe they sort of know most of their beginning sounds and they have about a dozen words. Those students aren't quite ready for Read Naturally Live. You may want to put them in word warm-ups live. We do have a letter naming section, section A of level 1, and we also have a CVC section B of level 1 of word warm-ups. So if you have a student who's kind of on that, they're not quite ready to begin working in Read Naturally Live, you may want to have them do some work in word warm-ups. So let's talk for a moment now about a student who has both fluency and phonics needs. That's a lot of our students, right? They are very fluency, of course. It's really hard to be fluent when you're struggling with phonics patterns. So let's say you have a student who has both. They may be able to work in the phonics series of Read Naturally Live, and then they wouldn't need word warm-ups, right? Or a different phonics program if you're using something else for phonics instruction. You can see that these are the different levels that are available within Read Naturally Live, and the phonics options are here in this highlighted color, and the skills that are taught are over in that far right, the table on the far right. So you can only consider phonics series placement for a student who reads at or below a Read Naturally level 3.0. Okay. So students cannot work in the phonics series if they read in 3.5, 4.0, 4.5. If they're placed at that high of a level, we don't have a phonics series level that's that high. And you do not want to hold them back on their fluency and comprehension development and their vocabulary exposure to address that phonics issue. You want to stretch them as much as you can. So you're going to put them in as high a level as you can and Read Naturally Live. And then you'll use Word Warm-Ups Live or a different phonics program to address that specific need. So you're going to assess the level corresponding to the student's phonics needs. Now we'll talk about this a little bit in the end. Word Warm-Ups does have a phonics assessment that I'll talk about in a little bit. So if you're looking for one there, that we do have that. If you already know that a student struggles with digraphs and blends and you know they read in a first, second grade level, then you're going to begin placing them in level 2.0 because that's where digraphs and blends is taught. Okay. If they fit within that range, then you're going to put that student in digraphs and blends in the phonics series. You won't need word warm-ups then. You can just use the phonics series and Read Naturally Live because their fluency and comprehension is at a close enough level to where we teach blends and digraphs and Read Naturally Live phonics series. Okay, so that is often the case when you're working with especially young students, first, second, third grade students. They often can work in those phonics series because their skills are fairly close. But as students get older, that becomes less likely. So if they are not able to fit, then you're going to teach them separately. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example of each one of those scenarios. Ella is a second grade student. She needs to improve fluency. She also needs work on long vowels. Okay, I think she's reading at about a mid first grade level. So I give her the Read Naturally Live placement 1.5 because that is where we teach long vowels in the phonics series. 1.3 is the level that corresponds with 1.5. And again, that's available. That information is within your Read Live program, so you can access that easily. So in this case, she read 45 words on that placement test, which is right within the range. So I can either put her in the sequence series or long vowel pairs or long vowel silent E. Okay, so I can choose. So this worked out well for me because Ella is going to work in the phonics series level 1.3. She's going to work on long vowel silent E while she also works on fluency and comprehension in Read Naturally Live phonics series. But what happens if your student reads at a higher level? This tends to be students that are, fourth, fifth, sixth grade level. Oftentimes they are able to read at a higher level than their earliest phonics need would indicate. Okay, so let's say Evan is a fifth grade student. He needs to work on fluency. He also needs to work on R control. We think he's reading at about a mid third grade level. So I give him that level. I'm not going to try to find out if he can fit in the R controlled. I know he can't because Read Naturally doesn't have a phonics level that's at mid third or above. Okay, so I know he's reading at mid third. I'm going to give him that passage. He does fit right in that range. So I'm going to have him work in the sequence series of Read Naturally Live. I have to work on phonics separately. Okay, now I can put him in word warm-ups because guess what? We have an R controlled section in our level 1, so we can do that. You maybe have something different that's used in your district, and that would be fine too. Let's take a student who only has phonics needs. This is not that common. But if a student only has phonics needs, then that student could just work in Word Warm-Ups Live or work in a separate phonics program. Okay. If a student has both, but is unable to work in our Read Naturally Live Phonics series because he reads at a 3.5 level or above, then he would also have to do something different to work on his phonics. Okay, so the kids who are going to use word warm-ups live within Read Live are going to be students who read at a higher level, so 3.5 or above, or students who read at a lower level and they just don't struggle with fluency. And so you're only going to use a phonics program. So if you're not familiar with Word Warm-Ups Live, it is one of the 4 programs within Read Live. It reinforces phonemic awareness and phonics. It develops mastery and automaticity in decoding, and it supports fluency, right? So we're going to build automaticity through some decoding practice. We have resources. A Word Warm-Ups Live Phonics Assessment is built right into your Read Live computer program. I'm going to show you where that is in a minute. We also have a Word Warm-Ups Live Phonics Scope and Sequence. Currently, Level 1 and Level 2 are available within Word Warm-Ups Live, but it won't be long. In September of 2022, we will be releasing our Level 3, which is our multisyllabic level. So be looking for that. That will, as soon as we release it, it will be available for you to assign to students. And of course, that's your longer words. So it's really going to be able to help students who are struggling with that, which is very common for our upper elementary and middle school students. So let's go back to Marcy for a moment. Oops, sorry. Marcy's a first grade student and she's meeting her fluency benchmark for first grade, but for whatever reason, she's struggling decoding 1-syllable words. And I know she's reading below a 3rd grade level. So I'm not going to put her in Read Naturally Live because I'm not worried about her fluency. What I'm going to do though is figure out where her earliest phonics need is. So I'm going to identify that using a phonics screener. We have one. Word Warm-Ups Live Phonics Assessment is in the program. I'm going to show you in just a minute. We're going to use it to place the student in the appropriate section of Word Warm-Ups Live. Okay, and I might be able to consider phonics placement in the phonics series if this was a student who needed that. Okay, so before I walk through how this assessment works, I'm just going to pop back into the actual Read Live staff module so I can show you where you can find this printable phonics assessment. If you are on the home screen when you're logged in as a staff member, you'll notice near the bottom middle is a tile that's titled Word Warm-Ups Live. Okay, in there is you are able to print and view and save the phonics assessments. Okay. Oops. You can also assign and remove access to Word Warm-Ups Live. Okay, so when you go under the Word Warm-Ups Live tile, notice that there is a blue button, only one blue button. And by clicking on that, it will open a new browser to provide you with the Word Warm-Ups Live Phonics Assessment. Okay, so you can print this off. There's detailed instructions in here. You can figure out exactly which section is right. I'm going to walk you through what it looks like to do that assessment. But sending a student through this assessment will tell you which section is right in Read Naturally Live. And it will also give a recommendation of whether or not the phonics series, so that is available. So that will provide you with information right in this assessment so you don't have to cross-reference. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go back into my PowerPoint. And we're going to show you what this assessment looks like. So what you're looking at right now is the staff or the teacher copy of Level 1, Section C, long vowels with silent E. Okay, so Marcy is given a sheet of an assessment to read off of. Of course, all that is on that assessment are these, in this case, these nonsense words, right? So yours is more cluttered because you are making marks. Hers is kind of a clean sheet that just has these words. As she reads, you're going to decide whether or not did she read it accurately. If she did, you put a check mark. In this case, I started writing, I wrote down what she said first, but then she went back and fixed it. So it was a self-correction and I put the check mark. In this case, she had an error. So I wrote down what she wrote as that error. Then I can total the score over here. And it tells me that if she has 3 or more errors or a total score of 6 or more, I'm going to stop testing. This is the right section for her. If she has less than that, then you're going to continue testing. Okay, so it tells you this right in that document. So you give her the next section up, section D. And when you give her section D, she has a score of 4 as a total score and 3 errors. So it means if 3 or more errors or a total score of 6 or more, stop testing. Well, she has 3 errors. So I'm going to stop testing. I can either place her in Word Warm-Ups Live Level 1 Section D, because this is where the long vowel issue is that she has. Or if Marcy was a student who could benefit from fluency and comprehension work, I could see if level 1.3 was right for her. So notice on this assessment tool, it gives you that recommendation. So you don't have to memorize where everything is. It will give you that recommendation. Okay. So in this case, Marcy, we're going to put her in Word Warm-Ups Live Level 1 Section D, which is long vowel pairs. Okay. With Evan, we're going to work on fluency and comprehension and read naturally live level 3.5, right? We already determined that, but I need to figure out exactly where he is for Word Warm-Ups Live. What is the appropriate level and section? So I think he's struggling. I think he's fine with everything up until R controlled. And so I select that section, section G. It's listed in your assessment pretty clearly. So we've already decided to put Evan in the read naturally live 3.5, goal of 110, but we need to address R control. So for that issue, I'm going to put them in Word Warm-Ups Live, section G, which deals with R control. So it is just another way to further differentiate. Our kids have varied degrees of issues in different areas, and we need to meet them exactly where they are. It's one thing that Read Naturally does beautifully, is it's a way to figure out where the student is on fluency and comprehension. Meet him there. They're not always at that place on phonics. So you have to meet them in a different spot on phonics. So using the combination of Read Naturally Live and Word Warm-Ups Live allows you to do that. Okay. Oops. So in this case, Evan is working on fluency and comprehension and Read Naturally Live 3.5. He's also working in Word Warm-Ups Level 1 Section G, which is R control. Okay. Now, a lot of times people wonder, well, if they're doing both programs, what do I do? And it kind of depends on how much time you have. If you only have 30 minutes, which, by the time they get in and get settled, you have a little less than 30 minutes. If that's the case, then what I would do usually is have the student pass a story and Read Naturally Live. And after they've passed the story, then they can go in and opt to do exercise and Word Warm-Ups. And then they go through all the steps of Word Warm-Ups until they pass a Word Warm-Ups exercise, and then they can flip back. If you're lucky enough to have more like 40 or 45 minutes or even 60 minutes, then you could do the first 10 minutes of every day as Word Warm-Ups. And then the 30, 35 minutes after that is Read Naturally Live. Okay, so the Word Warm-Ups could be a little bit shorter section. Now, as you're going through placement, you do not need to worry about writing down where everybody was or recording their scores on the different passages. The computer does that for you as the students go through placement with you, and you can run reports. It's in the staff module under the report tile. The first couple that are listed are those administrative reports, meaning those placement results reports, as well as the student password reports. Okay, so the placement results tells you how the student did on the different passages. It tells you what was recommended. It also tells you what you decided. So all that information is in there for you. You don't have to keep track as you go. You also don't have to keep track of what your user ID and passwords as you enter them. We do have a report for that as well. So I've taught you now, we've gone through how to place students, determining their level, selecting their series, and setting the goal. We talked about the various scenarios, and I demonstrated it within the program. I promised you that I would send you links in the chat box to the videos for these different kinds of placement situations. This first one that's coming through right now is placing students who do not have a phonics need. Okay, so I think it's a 4.5-minute video, a 4-minute video. So if you want to watch that right before you go to do placement with your students, that's going to be a nice refresher. The next video I'm sending through right now is placing a student who does have phonics needs. Okay, so you can watch that video as well. Now, after you place your students, the next task you have to do is train them. Okay, you got to teach them how to do it. We have a lesson plan for you. If you prefer to train your students in a whole group and you want to walk them all through a lesson plan, you can do that. We also have student training videos. The chat box is coming through with a link to our student training videos that is on our company website. It's appropriately located in the training tab. And then the drop-down menu lists student training videos. So it's pretty easy to find. But that is an option. We also have lots of resources on our help page. So please do go look there. Those videos that I sent you links to can be found in there, as can explicit instructions on what to click and where to go. Finally, remember back to the very first slide I showed you, or maybe it was the second, where I mentioned that placement has two parts. So there's conducting initial placement. That's what we talked about today. There's also checking initial placement. After your students have completed about 3 stories, you want to do that. Okay, I am going to be presenting a webinar on that, I think next in the month of September. I'll probably do another one in October. So check out our websites to watch that. It's not something you can do until your students have completed a few stories, because what you're relying on is the data from the stories that they complete and Read Naturally Live. Okay, but if you are interested, I am sending the links that you see on this slide in the chat box as well. So feel free to copy and paste those. The first link I just sent is the Checking Initial Placement Guide. It gives the instructions on how to do that. The second one is the cheater, or the quick one. It's easy because what it does is it allows you to just plug in the data that your students, how your students did on the first few stories. From the Students at a Glance report, you can just run that report, find the data and plug it in, and it will spit out the recommendation. Okay, so that Checking Initial Placement calculator is very, very helpful when you are first learning to do it. Once you've done it a few times, you won't need it anymore, but it is nice to be able to lean on when you're first starting to do it. All right, so I'm hoping I have left a couple minutes for questions. I think I have. And before I have Michelle ask questions if she received any, I just want to again thank you very much for attending today. Reminder to check out our website and our news and notes email newsletter that comes out. That will tell you when that Checking Initial Placement webinar is coming. So thanks again. And Michelle, are there any questions that I should answer before we wrap up?
Yes, I do have one, Claire. The person is asking that if they already have their reading assessment data from the beginning of the year, can they use the data to manually enter placement information?
Great question. And I get it. It's a very, very common question. The technical answer is yes. It is possible to technically do it. Underneath the Read Naturally Live tile, to the right of the place button, there is an edit button, so you can manually assign. Ideally, we hope you use this for adjusting students' levels and goals higher as they make progress, but it is possible to manually assign. What I will say is that it is not the best practices. And I know that you do a lot of assessments, and I know that it is very challenging to find the time to do that. But the 2 main reasons why placement and Read Naturally Live is essential to do it within our actual placement process is because, 1, students don't place in their instructional level. They place in the Read Naturally level that is right for them when they're using the Read Naturally strategy, when they're getting the support of that program. Okay, so our placement is set up to put them in a little bit different level than is their instructional level. The other thing that's essential is that goal, and you cannot pick a decent goal unless you know what their words correct per minute score is on the level you're putting them in. And some teachers say, well, I have benchmark data, I have a words correct per minute score, but that's on their grade level. That number is not going to be on the level that you place them in. I know that it takes 5 minutes per student, and I know that that takes a long time, but it will save you time in the end. I often hear from teachers who manually assigned, and then they have a bit of a mess and they're trying to clean it up. So investing that time at the beginning will save you in the long run. Great question.
Thank you, Claire. I'll just wait a few seconds here. If anybody has any last minute questions that they want to post in the meeting panel, go ahead and do that. In the meantime, while you're typing, I'll close out for the day. I hope everyone got at least something out of the webinar today. Please, we love having you come, so please let us know about that. Just a reminder that that we will be sending out a follow-up email with links to the webinar recording in about 24 hours. Feel free to share those recordings with your colleagues. Please respond to the survey questions that appear on your screen after the webinar concludes so that we can continue to improve the educational experience for all of you and our future webinars. Thank you. I don't see any other, oh, here did question come in. So, do they read off of a paper while I mark it on my computer? Did you hear that?
No, they do not. So it's built right into the computer. I'm just going to show it again real quick so you can see. Under that Read Naturally Live tile, when you go to that place button, you select the level that you think is best. When you click next, that passage appears on the screen. So they will read right off of this screen as they read. I do have paper for myself to mark a little, dash marks when they make an error so I can have an accurate number of missed words. And then after the minute, you'll hear a ding and it will ask you to click the last word. So the student is reading off the screen. The two of you are sitting and looking at the same computer while you count errors and the student reads. Thank you for asking that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. Just a second or two. If there's any follow-ups, you also can add any remaining questions you have at the conclusion with the survey. Thank you for your participation, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.